came to this country as a political refugee in 1981, June the 12th. And I think on July the 7th, first time I met Tony Benn at 12 Holland Park Avenue. The reason was when I started my journey from Pakistan, and I was absconding for 6 months in Pakistan, and Ziaul Haq, whose meeting was held last week here for his coup, and unfortunately Ittihad Hassan couldn't make it, but he is here today to speak on Tony Benn, and he might mention Ziaul Haq in his speech. I was absconding from him, and I had a small bounty on my head. I think nowadays bounty is on 100 million, 50 million. I wish it was that sort of heavy bounty on my head. I might have asked one of my brother or sister to catch me and give it to them and get the money to become rich people in Pakistan. But I knew Tony Benn when I started my journey from Pakistan, because a lot of trade unions mentioned me that there is a man of principle, a man who stands for human rights, a man who stands for principles and equalities in the world. So I came here, I contacted him. There was no website during those days. There was no mobile phone, so I simply rang a number 0207 229 0779. And my number was 0207 229 1469. So it was very convenient to speak to each other because we lived almost 200 yards away from each other. And I think if I tell you whole story, nobody else will be able to speak tonight, and you would have to stay here for another couple of days. So I won't. I'll just give you few. So since then, he introduced me to ILO, to ITF, to the parliament where we are sitting today, to his family as well. I met Steve when he stood in 80s as a member of GLC. I met many and many others. So I think the journey started from there, and it ended with a great sadness in March when I was in Lahore and I received a phone call from a gentleman from Slough that he said Tony Benn has passed away. And I couldn't stand up because I met him last in December in Kensington Town Hall, which I introduced him, although his wife, Caroline, was a regular goer there because she was a parent governor in Holland Park School for many, many years. And I met her many times. Let me finish here. This is a sad day for us that we don't have Tony Benn with us. We are looking for another Tony Benn. We have not found yet. I hope we can get one in this century who can stand for equality, who can stand for human rights, who can stand for oppressed people. And I think when people ask me what Third World Solidarity has achieved, I tell them that in 2007, Hilary Benn, son of Jeremy Khalid and Jeremy, son of Tony Benn, came to our meeting in Attlee Suite, and he promised, which Third World Solidarity has been campaigning for years, that we want resolution of United Nations to be fulfilled, that 0.7% of GDP should be paid as a development fund to the third world countries. Hillary promised that, and this government has committed to it, and they have achieved it. So I think Third World Solidarity, one achievement you can say that we have achieved 0.7% of GDP to be given for development of third world countries. And the second achievement is that we raise the voice of voiceless people. And I will just tell you a very important message which I have received from Ethiopian community. Their opposition leader and Secretary General of their opposition was kidnapped, abducted on 23rd of June by Yemenis government in collaboration with the Ethiopian government, and he is taken to Ethiopia. He's a British citizen. I know Jeremy Corbyn is leading his case, and thank you very much mentioning that. So we, the Third World Solidarity, is proud to raise the voices of those who are forgotten or who are lost in our normal lives. So let's carry on it. That was Tony Benn's mission, and Third World Solidarity will fulfill it. Can I ask you to, I think, stand for 1 minute in the memory of Tony Benn, and then I will invite other speakers. Yeah, I know. You are the next.
He loved Durham and all it stood for, and I am so proud that he was an honorary member of the Durham Miners Association. But he was so much more, a visionary, an inspiration, and a light in the darkness. We may never see his like again, which would be a tragedy for future generations. You meet tonight as internationalists who believe that we are all the same, despite our ethnic, cultural, or political origins, and Tony would say aye to that. Please remember my comrade fondly tonight, and in his memory, carry on your work in his name. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tony, from a very early age, when I joined the Labour Party, was always somebody that we aspired to, somebody that we looked up to, because he always spoke for the interest of those who weren't able to speak for themselves. That showed me what the Labour Party stood for in my early years of being in the Labour Party, because I believe thoroughly that was what the Labour Party was about. It was about looking at the equality, looking at justice for people who were not able, perhaps in some terms, to look after their own interest and to do that. And as I became more and more involved in the Labour Party and in politics, and the further higher you go up, you tend to sometimes slip away from those great words and principles of Tony Benn. But I think it was always interesting, as far as I was concerned, that there was some lever that always pulled you back. Because whenever he spoke, he guided you back to where you should be, as a Labour politician, as a socialist in this country, who understood what the meaning of the word being a socialist was, and what the Labour Party stood for. And sometimes when it didn't quite stand for what it should have stood for, he let us all know where the party should be, and we all had to at least listen and take heed of some of the words he was saying. He's a great man, and may he rest in peace. I don't think any of us can emulate what he's done, but we need more of those free thinkers who are able to ensure that we stick to our principles. And a huge tribute to Tony Benn and what he gave me personally in terms of guidance throughout the Labour Party, being a member of that. Thank you.
What a champion we have had in Tony Benn. His ideals are humbly reflected in the ideals of Third World solidarity, the ideals of internationalism, of democracy as a full participatory and indeed a radical project, equality and rights. And as Mushtaq has said also, the question of those people whose voices are not normally heard. And I think this is where also it's my personal view, but I think I speak for my colleagues. When Tony Benn spoke, he was, of course, articulate, he was clear, he was passionate, but he also always informed. When you heard Tony Benn speak, you learned something. He was drawing on history, and I think this is a really important lesson, not only because history has lessons which are not transparent and they're not easy to learn, but they're there for us to think about and take forward. And I think not only do we learn from the histories, which are again the histories of those that become invisible, the other histories, the histories that don't always get into the public domain and the history books, and increasingly possibly there is a risk of this, but the importance of learning from the past. And also within that, this ability to have a broad brush of history and a broad brush of the world, of understanding the complexities of the world we live in, while at the same time paying a lot of attention to the minutiae of everyday lives. Everyday people and their struggles were as important as the big events in history. And I think this is a lesson that is an enduring lesson.
In memory of Tony, it's actually quite difficult to summarize so much of what he did in internationalism and of all the different groups he supported and the ways he was able to inspire large numbers of people to undertake tasks they hadn't hitherto thought they could do. And his support for this group was very strong indeed. And I think one of the greatest events was when you had Noam Chomsky speaking here. And it seemed to me that there is a generation of people, Tony, Noam Chomsky, Ben Bella, many others, who've given a huge contribution, not just to the principles of international solidarity and justice, but also their ability to communicate across generations, across nationalities and across language, which is something that Tony was spectacularly good at doing. Britain is obviously a former imperial power, and there's an awful lot of imperial pretentiousness about attitudes in the Foreign Office and foreign policy, and indeed pervade this building today, to this day. And we also have a legacy of issues that Britain and its colonial past has created around the world, Palestine being just one of them. In the 1920s and 30s, there was a huge debate in the labour movement about whether or not there should be the idea of dominion and self-governing status for British colonies that would essentially remain part of Britain, or whether there should be a move towards independence. The French debate was even more intense, and they moved very strongly towards making overseas territories a department of France. Britain, generally speaking, didn't, but that debate nevertheless went on. The turning point in the thirst for independence was the Pan-African Unity Conference at Chorlton-cum-Hardy Town Hall in 1945 in Manchester, when many African leaders, all of whom went on to become leaders of their own countries, forged an alliance calling for self-government and then independence for, mainly at that time, African colonies. Remember, Britain was going through a period of the most unbelievable treble standards. The first standard was the good one, and that was the very good domestic policy that the post-war Labour government had on National Health Service, public ownership, council housing, so many things. The bad side of it and the good side of it were in the foreign policy. There was an undertaking that independence would come to India. Unfortunately, that was accompanied by partition, which of itself is a huge debate. But there was also the predilection of that government to engage in colonial wars in Kenya and in many other places. And the brutality and the behaviour of the British Armed Forces in Kenya, not just Kenya, but many other places, was absolutely appalling. Many who were on the left of the Labour Party and had indeed supported the Attlee government in its domestic policy by being critical of its foreign policy, and particularly of the foundation of NATO, such as Fenner Brockway and others, came together in 1954 to found the Movement for Colonial Freedom. And Tony was there at the foundation meeting. Fenner Brockway was there and many others, and Tony was Movement for Colonial Freedom's first treasurer. And he performed those duties very well, and the Movement for Colonial Freedom grew very quickly and was an important factor in pressurising MPs and pressurising the British government and supporting independence movements in Africa. And in particular, what was happening in Kenya, where the Mau Mau rebellion was taking place. The British media, I remember growing up with this as a small child, were full of stories about Mau Mau atrocities and Mau Mau abuse, and how every European was at risk in Kenya. It was a travesty of the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation was that British colonial forces were desperate to hang on to the land and the power in Kenya, and the British Army was supporting them in doing that. And of course it suited them therefore to pillory all those that were calling for independence. Tony, as a Member of Parliament, quite a young Member of Parliament at the time, very bravely, along with a very small number of others, raised the issue of the treatment of Mau Mau people in concentration camps organised by the British Army. And then fast forward, last summer, which is what, 60, 70 years later, the British Foreign Secretary gets up in Parliament and comes within a scintilla of giving a general apology for the behaviour of British forces. Why? because of the campaign of the Mau Mau People for Justice, and it was a sort of poignant moment. I was in the High Court with them when they actually were presenting their case and indeed won their case in the High Court. These are people that had been disgracefully treated by the British Army. Thank you very much.
Since everyone else has said when they first met him, I suppose I should put on the record I first met my father in 1953 when I was born. And for him, he was a product of his childhood, as we all are, the world that we're brought into, what we're taught, what we discuss with our parents, my grandfather and my grandmother, and his views were formed by experience. And the same is true for all of us. And as my uncle said at his funeral, when he trained as a pilot in Rhodesia in the Second World War, he was sent out there to get his wings, he was appalled at the treatment of black Africans that he experienced for the first time in his life. And that had left a very profound mark upon him. And as Jeremy said, when he was elected to Parliament in 1950 and the movement for colonial freedom was founded in 1954, he was one of those who signed up to support it, along with such figures as Michael Foot and Dick Crossman, Barbara Castle, Jenny Lee, and many, many other colleagues. And for him, the cause of colonial freedom was, for that century, as important as the fight against slavery had been. And he once wrote, he said, two flames have always burnt in the human heart. The flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope that you can build a better world. And I can think of no better description of what motivated him throughout his life. And one of my early memories, indeed many of my early memories, are of going on various demonstrations, holding my mum's hand or my dad's hand, as we would march to Trafalgar Square to protest against apartheid, to protest against some injustice around the world. And the thing we have to remember from this vantage point in history about that campaign is, well, colonial freedom we take for granted because the colonies in the end won their freedom. They were not granted. In the end it was given begrudgingly. But that was not the case at the time. And it was a struggle. Really important that we remember our history, because Dad would always say that things that are in the end come to pass, which we then very quickly take for granted, did not come to pass because someday someone said, oh, I think it's a jolly good idea and I think I will make it happen. It's been a struggle. It's been a fight. It's been a campaign. People were locked up. People were executed for campaigning for colonial freedom. Indeed, he once wrote, he said he had a great sense of humour, as you know. He said, I've been interested in all the people i.e. the British, locked up. I met Gandhi once. He did, when he was young. We locked him up. I met Nehru. He was locked up. Mandela was locked up. Kenneth Kaunda from Zambia was locked up. We locked up Nkrumah. Yeah. Now that is a reminder of our colonial history and the movement for colonial freedom, which then became liberation. And I want to thank the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Third World Solidarity, New Mushtaq, for organising this evening, have kept that flame, the burning flame against injustice, the burning flame that believes that we can build a better world alive, because that is the process by which millions and millions and millions of people around the world had the chance finally to elect their own government, to hold their government to account, and to determine their own future, and not to have it determined by others around the world. And we are greatly touched, as his family, by the many kindnesses that have been expressed since he died, for the kindness that you bestow upon him this evening by gathering for this memorial event, and to wish you all of the best in the fights and the struggles and the victories that are to come. Thank you very much.
After such profound speeches, culminating in Hillary's speech as the son and heir of the tradition and legacy of Tony Benn, And after the passionate speech by Mr. Amanullah Khan, there seems to be nothing left. And I think, first of all, I think Mr. Mushtaq al-Ashari is capable of doing amazing things, including this of holding a meeting in memory of Tony Benn in the Margaret Thatcher room of this building. There is an irony in that, but I think the irony should be used to actually pronounce and further sharpen the image and the memory of Tony Benn. I remember him from my early days as a student, as an undergraduate in Cambridge. Cambridge was a radical campus. Cambridge was a radical campus in the 60s. Oxford was the conservative campus. We, the undergraduates, had a great admiration even in our student days and our young days for Tony Benn. This is also the irony coming out. In the Margaret Thatcher room, you can only probably talk. But in our time as students, we were deeply impressed and moved by Tony Benn taking up causes of the third world, because we were all mostly our circles were either from the third world or devotees of Professor Robinson at Cambridge, who taught us Marxist theories and thought. And in that time, which is a time when radicalization and radicalism had, by today's standards, a benign meaning. Today's standards, the whole concept of radicalism and radicalization has changed. In those times, radical was the left, the socialist, the Marxist, the person thinking of a new international order, a secular political entity was radical. Now, it just so happens that radicalization and radical has taken a sharp turn to the right, and we talk of radicalization as if it is the radicalization of the Muslims, or the radicalization of the Christian right, the radicalization of India, of the Hindu BJP, Hindutva, extreme right-wing religious persuasions and practices have become the norm of radicalization and the definition of radicalization.
We will continue working for the causes of Tony Benn, which are very dear to us. And I think it is very important that we bring the people from around the world, from Africa, from Asia, from Middle East, who are standing for these principles. I think they are needed, they are very important. Wherever we can do that, we should continue doing it. Thank you very much once again for coming and spending this evening with us. Special thanks to the media people who are here, who are going to report it. This will be on YouTube, and anybody who wants to listen to these speeches and this, let me know, we will send you the link. Can I say thank you to all those who have sat passionately and peacefully in the audience. A big clap to you, and a